Money screams, but wealth whispers. And on Flight 902 from New York to London, silence was about to turn deadly. When Eleanor Vance, a socialite with more debt than sense, decided her $30,000 handbag deserved a seat more than the black man standing in the aisle, she didn't just break airline protocol. She signed her own social death warrant. She thought she was blocking a nobody. She didn't realize she was blocking the man who owned the very tarmac they were parked on. What followed wasn't just an argument. It was a systematic dismantling of an ego, ending in a flight cancellation that would make global headlines. Buckle up. Karma is about to reach cruising altitude. The humidity in New York that afternoon was the kind that stuck to your skin like a bad reputation. Inside the climate-controlled cabin of the Boeing 777, however, the air was crisp, scented with the faint, expensive aroma of leather and recirculated oxygen. Marcus Sterling adjusted the strap of his worn canvas messenger bag. He was tired. Not just long day at the office, tired, but the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from a 6-month merger negotiation that had finally closed 3 hours ago. At 42, Marcus was the CEO of Sterling Logistics, a company that didn't just move packages, they moved economies. If you bought a car in Europe, ate an avocado in winter, or flew on a commercial jet, Marcus Sterling's algorithms had likely made it happen. But looking at him now, shuffling down the aisle of first class in a charcoal hoodie, dark jeans and scuffed sneakers, you wouldn't see a billionaire. You would see a tired man trying to get home to his daughter's piano recital in London. He checked his boarding pass. Seat 1A, the prime spot. He had booked it specifically for the extra legroom and the privacy. He needed sleep more than he needed oxygen. As he approached the front of the cabin, he stopped. Seat 1A was occupied. It wasn't occupied by a person. It was occupied by a bag. Specifically, it was a Hermes Himalaya Birkin bag, arguably one of the most expensive handbags in the world. It sat on the plush leather seat like a queen on a throne, buckled in with the safety belt, its white and grey crocodile skin gleaming under the cabin lights. In seat 1B, the aisle seat next to it, sat a woman who looked like she had been carved out of marble and suspicion. Eleanor Vance was in her late 40s, wearing a cream-coloured Chanel suit that cost more than most people's cars. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful, and she was already sipping a glass of pre-flight champagne, scrolling through her phone with a manicured thumb. Marcus stood there for a moment, blinking. He checked his ticket again. Definitely 1A. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me, ma'am." Eleanor didn't look up. She flicked her finger across the screen, dismissing him entirely. Marcus took a breath. He wasn't in the mood for games. "Ma'am, I think you have your bag in my seat." Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Eleanor lowered her phone. She turned her head, her sunglasses sliding down her nose, just enough to reveal eyes that were cold and assessing. She looked at Marcus's sneakers. She looked at his hoodie. She looked at the canvas bag on his shoulder. She let out a short, derisive puff of air. "The overhead bins are full in economy," she said, her voice dripping with a faux polite veneer that was sharper than a knife. "You'll have to check that bag at the gate. This is first class." She turned back to her phone. Marcus blinked. He was used to being underestimated. In fact, he built his career on it. But this was blatant. "I'm aware this is first class," Marcus said, his voice level. "I have a ticket for this seat. Seat 1A, right there under your bag." Eleanor sighed, a dramatic sound that signaled she was being terribly inconvenienced by the help. She turned to him fully now, putting her phone down on the armrest. "Listen," she said, slowing her words down, as if speaking to a child. "I don't know how you snuck up here, or if the stewardess let you through to use the front lavatory, but you need to go back to your section. Row 30 is that way. She pointed a diamond-clad finger toward the back of the plane. I'm not in row 30, Marcus said, stepping closer. He held out his boarding pass. I'm in 1A. Please move your bag. Eleanor didn't even look at the ticket. She looked at the bag. Do you have any idea what this is? She asked, gesturing to the Birkin. This bag is worth more than your life insurance policy. I am not putting it on the floor, and I am certainly not shoving it in an overhead bin where it might get scratched by some backpack. It's a seat for a passenger, Marcus said, his patience thinning. I am the passenger. The bag is luggage. I bought a ticket for it, Eleanor lied. She had to be lying. Airlines didn't sell first-class seats to handbags unless you were royalty, and even then, there were protocols. Show me the boarding pass for the bag, Marcus challenged. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. The mask of politeness slipped completely. Look, I don't know who you think you are talking to, but I am a Platinum Legacy member with this airline. My husband is Julian Vance, the senior partner at Vance & Associates. We know the CEO of this airline personally. Now get out of my face before I have you arrested for harassment. The cabin had gone quiet. Other passengers in first class, a mix of business executives and wealthy tourists, were watching. Some looked annoyed at the disturbance. Others looked curious. Marcus didn't budge. He looked at the bag, then back at her. I don't care who your husband is. I paid $6,000 for this seat, and I intend to sit in it. Eleanor let out a sharp laugh. You? Paid $6,000? Did you steal the credit card? The insult hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Marcus's jaw tightened. Move the bag. No, Eleanor snapped. She reached up and pressed the call button repeatedly, dinging the chime over and over like a fire alarm. Stewardess! Stewardess! We have a security issue in row 1. Marcus took a step back, shaking his head. He pulled out his phone. He could have called the airline's VP of operations right then. He had the number saved. He could have ended this in 30 seconds. But Marcus Sterling believed in giving people enough rope to hang themselves, and Eleanor Vance was currently measuring out a noose. The curtain separating the galley from the cabin whipped open. A flight attendant, breathless and looking slightly frazzled, hurried down the aisle. Her name tag read Jessica. She had a kind face, but the stress lines around her eyes suggested this wasn't her first difficult flight of the day. Mrs. Vance, Jessica asked, forcing a smile. Is everything all right? I saw the call light. It most certainly is not, Eleanor said, pointing a rigid finger at Marcus. This individual is harassing me. He is trying to steal my personal belongings and is refusing to return to his seat in economy. I want him removed. Now. Jessica turned to Marcus. She took in his appearance, the hoodie, the jeans, but she was a professional. She didn't make assumptions. Sir, may I see your boarding pass, please? Jessica asked gently. Marcus handed it to her without a word. Jessica scanned it. Her eyebrows shot up. She looked at the date, the seat assignment, and then back at Marcus. She handed it back with a deferential nod. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Everything appears to be in order. You are in seat 1A. She turned back to Eleanor. Mrs. Vance, this gentleman is indeed assigned to the seat next to you. I'm going to have to ask you to move your bag so he can sit down. Eleanor's mouth dropped open. She looked from Jessica to Marcus and back again, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. You must be mistaken, Eleanor hissed. Check it again. There is a glitch in your system. Does he look like he belongs in first class? Look at him. Ma'am, Jessica's voice hardened slightly. We do not judge passengers by their attire. Mr. Sterling has a valid ticket. Please place your bag in the overhead bin. I can assist you with it." Jessica reached out toward the Birkin. Eleanor slapped her hand away. The sound was sharp, like a crack of a whip. The entire first-class cabin gasped. Even the man in 3C, who had been asleep with an eye mask on, sat up. "Do not touch my property," Eleanor shrieked. "This is a Himalaya Birkin. It is worth $200,000. If you put a single fingerprint on it, I will sue you. I will sue this airline, and I will personally ensure you are serving coffee at a roadside diner by next week." Jessica recoiled, clutching her hand. She was shaking. "Ma'am, you cannot touch the flight crew. That is a federal offense." "And you are failing to protect a platinum member," Eleanor countered, her voice rising an octave. "I told you I am not moving it. This man can sit somewhere else. Put him in the jump seat. Put him in the cargo hold for all I care. But he is not sitting next to me." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between the terrified flight attendant and the raging socialite. His voice was low, dangerous. "You hit her," Marcus stated. It wasn't a question. "She tried to manhandle my property," Eleanor yelled. She stood up now, towering in her heels, though Marcus still had a good 5 inches on her. "And you are the cause of this. If you had just known your place and gone back to the cattle class where you belong, none of this would be happening." "My place," Marcus repeated slowly. "You think my place is determined by what I'm wearing? I think your place is determined by your bank account, and clearly yours is empty," Eleanor spat. She looked around the cabin, seeking allies. "Can you believe this? I pay full fare to fly in peace, and they let just anyone in here now. It's affirmative action gone wrong. That's what this is." A man in 2F, an older gentleman in a suit, spoke up. "Hey lady, that's enough. Just move the bag." "Mind your own business," Eleanor snapped at him. She turned back to Marcus and Jessica. "I am not moving. The bag is not moving. If you want this plane to take off, you will find him another seat. Those are my terms." She sat back down, crossed her arms, and stared straight ahead, radiating entitlement like a nuclear reactor. Jessica looked at Marcus, tears welling in her eyes. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry. I can check if we have another seat in business, but first is full." "No," Marcus said. He wasn't looking at Jessica. He was looking at Eleanor. "Do not apologize, Jessica. You have done your job perfectly." He pulled out his phone again. The screen illuminated his face. "Mrs. Vance?" Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying to the back of the cabin. "I'm going to give you one last chance. Move the bag, apologize to Jessica, and let me sit in the seat I paid for. If you do not, you are going to regret the next 10 minutes for the rest of your life." Eleanor didn't even turn her head. "Go to hell." Marcus nodded. "Okay." He tapped a contact on his phone. He didn't dial 911. He didn't dial customer service. He dialed a number that bypassed the switchboards entirely and rang directly on a secure line in the control tower of JFK Airport. "This is Marcus Sterling," he said into the phone. "Authorization code Alpha 9 Victor Sterling. Yes, I'm currently on board Flight 902. We have a code red personnel issue, assault on a crew member, and refusal to comply with federal safety regulations. No, I don't want security to just remove her. I want you to issue a ground stop for this specific aircraft." Eleanor's ear twitched. She heard the words, but she didn't understand them. Ground stop? Authorization code? Marcus listened for a moment, then spoke again. "Yes. Cancel the flight slot. Mark the aircraft for immediate maintenance review. Deplane everyone. I want this plane empty in 10 minutes. He hung up. Eleanor turned to him, a smirk playing on her lips. "Who was that? Your imaginary friend? You think pretending to make phone calls is going to scare me?" Suddenly, the cabin lights flickered. The hum of the engines, which had been idling as they waited for pushback, died down into a low whine. The air conditioning vents stopped blowing. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, but it sounded different this time. Tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller from the flight deck. We have just received an order from, Corporate Logistics and Ground Control. We have been ordered to power down immediately due to an operational irregularity. The flight has been cancelled." Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. "I repeat, Flight 902 is cancelled. All passengers must deplane immediately and return to the gate. Law enforcement is meeting the aircraft. Please leave your carry-on luggage and exit the aircraft in an orderly fashion." Eleanor froze. Her champagne glass tilted, spilling a few drops onto her skirt. "Cancelled," she whispered. "They can't cancel it. I have a gala in London tonight." She looked at Marcus. He was standing calmly in the aisle, sliding his phone back into his pocket. He looked down at her, his eyes cold and hard as flint. "I told you," Marcus said. "You should have moved the bag." The chaotic energy of a cancelled international flight is a specific kind of hell. It's a mixture of confusion, rage, and the collective groan of 300 people realizing their plans have just been incinerated. As the jet bridge extended back to the plane, the first-class cabin was a theater of disbelief. Passengers were grabbing their carry-ons, muttering curses, but all eyes were glued to two people: the man in the hoodie who had seemingly shut down a Boeing 777 with a phone call, and the woman clutching a Himalaya Birkin like it was a holy relic. "This is insane!" Eleanor shrieked, standing up. She glared at the pilot, Captain Miller, who had emerged from the cockpit. "Captain, you cannot cancel this flight. Do you know who I am? I am going to have your license." Captain Miller, a grey-haired veteran who looked like he'd seen everything, didn't even blink. He looked at Jessica, the flight attendant, who was holding an ice pack to her hand. "Mum," Captain Miller said, his voice steel, "you assaulted a crew member. In the eyes of the FAA, you are a threat to the safety of this flight. The flight isn't cancelled because of him. It's cancelled because I refuse to fly with you on board. And Mr. Sterling..." Well, Mr. Sterling expedited the paperwork. "Mr. Sterling," Eleanor scoffed. "The hobo in the hoodie?" "The man who owns Sterling Logistics," the captain corrected quietly. "The company that supplies the fuel for this airline, and the catering, and the ground handling services." Eleanor froze. The blood drained from her face so fast it looked like a curtain dropping. She looked at Marcus. Marcus didn't look at her. He was busy helping an elderly woman in row 2 get her bag down from the overhead bin. "Police are at the gate, ma'am," the captain finished. "Please exit." Eleanor grabbed her Birkin and stormed toward the door, her chin held high. She was convinced this was a misunderstanding that her husband, Julian, would fix in 5 minutes. She marched up the jet bridge, her heels clicking aggressively on the metal floor, rehearsing the speech she would give the manager. But as she stepped into the terminal, she didn't see a manager. She saw 4 officers from the Port Authority Police Department. Standing behind them was a man in a sharp blue suit. The airline's station manager. "That's him!" Eleanor shouted, pointing back at the plane where Marcus was emerging. "That man threatened me. He caused a disturbance. Arrest him!" The lead officer, a burly man whose name tag read Sergeant Kowalski, ignored her pointing finger. He stepped forward, blocking her path. "Eleanor Vance?" Kowalski asked. "Yes, and I am the victim here. I want to file a report against..." "Ma'am, please turn around and place your hands behind your back," Kowalski said, pulling a pair of zip ties from his belt. Eleanor stopped dead. "Excuse me?" "You are under arrest for assault on a flight crew member and interfering with flight crew duties. That's a federal offense under Title 49. "You can't arrest me," Eleanor screamed, clutching her bag to her chest. "Do you know who my husband is? This is a $30,000 bag. I can't be handcuffed." "The bag goes to evidence, ma'am," Kowalski said, reaching for it. "No." Eleanor made a fatal mistake. She jerked away, swinging the bag like a weapon. The heavy hardware of the Birkin connected with the officer's shoulder. It wasn't a hard hit, but it was enough. "Resisting arrest! Assault on an officer!" Kowalski barked. In seconds, Eleanor Vance, socialite platinum member, wife of a high-powered attorney, was face down on the dirty airport carpet. Her cheek was pressed against the grey industrial fibres. Her hands were wrenched behind her back. The cold plastic of the zip ties bit into her wrists. And the Birkin? It skidded across the floor, coming to a stop at the feet of a pair of scuffed sneakers. Marcus looked down at the bag. Then he looked at Eleanor, who was thrashing and screaming obscenities that echoed through the entire terminal. A crowd had gathered, and, inevitably, the phones were out. Dozens of iPhones were recording. Flashbulbs went off. The spectacle of a wealthy woman in a Chanel suit being pinned to the ground by police while screaming about a handbag was internet gold. Marcus watched for a moment, his expression unreadable. He bent down, picked up the Birkin by its handle, and walked over to the police officer. "Evidence, I believe," Marcus said, handing the bag to the sergeant. "Thanks, Mr. Sterling," Kowalski said, recognizing him. "Sorry for the trouble." "Not your fault, Sergeant," Marcus replied. "Just make sure the DA gets the video from the cabin. Passenger in 2A recorded the slap." As they hauled Eleanor to her feet, her hair disheveled, mascara smudged, dignity shattered, she locked eyes with Marcus. "My husband will destroy you!" she screamed, spit flying from her mouth. "You hear me? You're dead! You're nothing!" Marcus didn't respond. He simply turned to the airline agent. "Is the VIP lounge open? I have a few calls to make while I wait for my jet." The Concorde room at JFK is a sanctuary of silence and excess, reserved for the ultra-wealthy. Marcus sat in a private corner, sipping sparkling water. He wasn't relaxing, though. He was working. He had his laptop open. On the screen was a live feed of the stock market and a dossier on Vance & Associates, the law firm where Eleanor's husband was a senior partner. Marcus wasn't a vengeful man by nature. He was a transactional man. If you broke a contract, there were penalties. Eleanor had broken the social contract, and the penalty clause was about to trigger. He picked up his phone. "David." "Yes, it's Marcus. I need you to pull our retainer from Vance & Associates. Effective immediately. Yes, all of it. The merger defense, the logistics liability, the patent portfolio, everything." He listened for a moment. "I don't care if we've been with them for 10 years. Julian Vance's wife just assaulted my staff. Well, the airline staff, but on my flight. It's a character issue. If he can't control his household, he can't control my assets. Pull the money." He hung up. That was a $12 million annual loss for the law firm. A heavy blow, but not a fatal one. Not yet. 20 minutes later, the double doors of the lounge swung open. Julian Vance walked in. He looked exactly like his wife, polished, expensive, and currently radiating a frantic, sweaty energy. He was on his cell phone shouting, "I don't care what the bail is. Get her out." "What do you mean? Federal holding. Call the senator." Julian hung up and scanned the room. He spotted Marcus. Julian didn't know Marcus was the one who cancelled the flight. He only knew that some troublemaker had gotten his wife arrested. He stormed over to Marcus's table, his briefcase swinging. "You!" Julian barked. "Are you the guy?" Marcus looked up, closing his laptop slowly. "Mr. Vance, I assume you're here to apologize." "Apologize?" Julian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. I'm here to sue you into the Stone Age. Eleanor told me everything on her one phone call. You harassed her. You provoked her. And now she's in a cell because of your lies." "She slapped a flight attendant, Julian," Marcus said calmly. "And she assaulted a police officer. I didn't make her do that. She was under duress." Julian slammed his hand on the table, rattling the water glass. "And I know who you are. You're—" "Wait." Julian stopped. He squinted. The rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by a dawn of horrifying recognition. He looked at the hoodie. Then he looked at the face. Julian Vance was a high-powered lawyer. He knew the faces of the Fortune 500. He had seen this face on the cover of Forbes last month. "Sterling?" Julian whispered. "Marcus Sterling?" "Hello, Julian," Marcus said. "I believe your firm handles the intellectual property for my European division. Or rather, handled." Julian's face went pale. "Marcus, Mr. Sterling, I didn't realize it was you. Eleanor said it was some guy in a hoodie." "I like hoodies," Marcus shrugged. "They're comfortable." Julian swallowed hard. He was suddenly sweating profusely. "Look, Mr. Sterling, let's not be hasty. Eleanor, she can be difficult. She's passionate. But surely we can resolve this without what?" Marcus cut him off. "Without the police? That's out of my hands. The FBI is involved now, or without you losing my business." Julian flinched. You're pulling the account?" "Already done," Marcus said. "I just got off the phone with David. But that's not your biggest problem, Julian." Marcus turned his laptop around. "This is." On the screen was Twitter, X. The trending topic Warsaw Bag Lady was #1 in the United States. There was a video. It was clear, high definition, shot from row 2. It showed Eleanor screaming at Jessica. It showed the slap. It showed her calling Marcus cattle class. It showed her screaming, "Do you know who my husband is? Julian Vance." 2 million views in 40 minutes, Marcus noted dryly. "And look at the comments." Julian leaned in, his hands trembling. "Justice warrior. Julian Vance, the lawyer? Vance & Associates protects polluters, and now his wife beats up flight attendants? Boycott. Flight risk. Imagine being that rich and that trashy, and we'll just eat the rich. Legal eagle. If this is how the partner's wife acts, imagine how they treat their paralegals. Toxic. My firm," Julian whispered. "The partners are going to see this." "The partners aren't the issue," Marcus said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "The internet is the issue. You see, Julian, your wife didn't just insult me. She insulted everyone who has ever been looked down on. She insulted every service worker, every person in economy class, every person who can't afford a Birkin. She made herself the face of entitlement." Marcus stood up. He slung his canvas bag over his shoulder. "I'd check your email, Julian. I think your other clients follow the trends pretty closely. Nobody wants to be associated with a sinking ship." Marcus walked away, leaving Julian Vance standing in the middle of the luxury lounge, staring at the laptop screen as the view count ticked up. 2.1 million, 2.2 million. By the time Eleanor was processed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell at the Queen's Detention Center, her life as she knew it was over. She just didn't know it yet. She was stripped of her Chanel suit, forced into an orange jumpsuit that smelled of bleach and despair. They took her jewelry. They took her phone. Inside the cell, she sat on a metal cot, still fuming. "When Julian gets here," she muttered to the empty air, "heads are going to roll. That man, that horrible man." She had no idea that outside those concrete walls, the world was burning her effigy. The video hadn't just stayed on Twitter. It was on TikTok. It was on Instagram Reels. Reaction videos were popping up. People were dissecting her outfit, her voice, her insults. Then, the internet sleuths got to work. Within an hour of the video going viral, users on Reddit had found 1. Eleanor's home address in the Hamptons. 2. Her involvement in a charity that had been accused of misappropriating funds 3 years ago. 3. A video from 2 years prior, where she yelled at a valet driver in Miami. It was an avalanche of bad press. At the offices of Vance and Associates in Manhattan, the phones were ringing off the hook. But it wasn't new clients. It was reporters. It was angry protesters gathering in the lobby. The managing partner of the firm, a ruthless man named Arthur Pendleton, called an emergency meeting. Julian Vance wasn't invited. Instead, Julian was in a cab, stuck in traffic on the Van Wyck Expressway, trying to get to the jail. His phone buzzed. It was Arthur. "Julian," Arthur's voice was cold. "Don't come to the office tomorrow." "Arthur, listen. It's a misunderstanding," Julian pleaded. "We just lost the Sterling account, Julian. That's 15% of our billables. And 3 other corporate clients just emailed saying they don't want bad optics by being associated with the Vance name. You are toxic. You can't fire me. I'm a named partner." "Read your contract, Julian. The morals clause. You and your spouse must not bring disrepute to the firm. We are invoking it. We're buying you out. Pennies on the dollar. You're done." The line went dead. Julian dropped the phone. He stared out the window at the grey New York skyline. He had just lost a 7-figure salary. He had lost his reputation. And then his phone buzzed again. A notification from his bank. Alert. Joint account frozen. He tapped it frantically. It wasn't the bank freezing it. It was a court order. Someone had moved fast. But who? Back at the airport, Marcus Sterling was boarding his Gulfstream G650. He settled into the leather seat and opened a file his legal team had just sent over. It was a lawsuit filed on behalf of Jessica, the flight attendant. Marcus had offered to pay for her legal representation, top-tier representation, the kind that sharks like Julian Vance usually provided, but now would be fighting against. They weren't just suing for assault. They were suing for emotional distress, defamation, and, crucially, punitive damages. They were seeking a freeze on the Vance assets to ensure payment. Marcus looked out the window as the jet engines roared to life. He watched the commercial planes lining up on the tarmac, tiny in comparison to the forces he had just set in motion. He took a sip of whiskey. "Karma," he whispered to the empty cabin, "is efficient." But the real twist was yet to come. Because while Julian and Eleanor were worrying about money and reputation, they had forgotten one small, crucial detail about the contents of that white Birkin bag, and the police had just opened it. While the internet was busy memeing Eleanor's arrest, and Julian Vance was watching his career evaporate in a luxury lounge, Sergeant Kowalski was in the evidence room at the Port Authority precinct. Standard procedure dictated an inventory of all seized personal property. The white Himalaya Birkin, scuffed from its slide across the terminal floor, sat on a stainless steel table. Kowalski put on latex gloves. "All right, let's see what's worth 30 grand, he muttered to his partner, Officer Diaz. He opened the clasp. The interior was lined with soft goat leather. He pulled out the usual items, a gold iPhone, a wallet stuffed with black credit cards, a prescription bottle for Xanax, and a silk scarf. "Is that it?" Diaz asked. "Seems light." Kowalski frowned. He picked up the bag again. It felt heavier than it should have, even for quality leather. He ran his hand along the bottom of the interior. "It's uneven," Kowalski noted. He pressed down. There was a slight click. "False bottom?" Diaz raised an eyebrow. "In a Birkin?" Kowalski scoffed. "That's sacrilege. But let's look." He carefully peeled back the inner lining, which had been professionally altered. Underneath the leather floor of the bag was a thin, velvet-lined compartment. It wasn't drugs, it wasn't a weapon. It was a stack of USB drives, 5 of them, taped together, and a small black ledger. Kowalski opened the ledger. It wasn't a diary. It was a list of names, dates, and dollar amounts. Massive amounts. Next to the names were routing numbers for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. "Diaz," Kowalski said, his voice dropping. "Call the captain, and get the FBI on the line. I think we just found the Vance retirement plan." Meanwhile, back in the holding cell, Eleanor was pacing. She was worried about her reputation. Yes. She was worried about the assault charge. But beneath the anger, a cold, hard stone of terror was forming in her gut. She had forgotten, in her rage, why she hadn't wanted to check the bag. It wasn't just because it was expensive. It was because Julian had told her, explicitly, "Do not let this bag out of your sight. Do not let anyone touch it. If we get this to London, the accounts are secure." They were fleeing. The gala in London was a cover. The charity investigation mentioned on Reddit wasn't just internet gossip. It was real, and the Vances knew an indictment was coming. They were moving their liquid assets, encrypted keys to millions in embezzled funds, out of the country before the feds could freeze them. And she had just used the evidence to assault a police officer. The door to the cell block opened. It wasn't her lawyer. It was 2 agents in windbreakers with FBI stenciled on the back. "Eleanor Vance?" one of them said, smiling without any warmth. "We'd like to have a chat about your accessories." At the same time, at JFK, Julian Vance was trying to leave the airport. He had decided to run. He would catch a flight to Mexico. He turned a corner toward the exit, head down, collar up. He walked straight into a wall of blue uniforms. "Julian Vance," Sergeant Kowalski said, holding up a pair of cuffs. "You're under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy." "You have no proof," Julian stammered, his face grey. Kowalski held up a clear evidence bag. Inside was the white Himalaya Birkin. "Your wife gave us everything we needed," Kowalski said, right in the palm of her hand. The fall of the House of Vance was not a quiet affair. It was a spectacle that consumed the news cycle for months, a slow-motion car crash that the world couldn't stop watching. By the time the trial of the United States of America versus Eleanor and Julian Vance began, the humidity of that summer day at JFK had been replaced by the biting cold of a New York winter. The pavement outside the Southern District of New York Courthouse was a sea of media vans, protesters, and curious onlookers. They held signs. Some read, "Justice for Jessica," referring to the flight attendant. Others, more pointedly, read, "It's not about the bag." Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. The air was thick with the smell of wet wool coats and nervous anticipation. Eleanor Vance sat at the defense table, but the marble statue of a woman who had boarded Flight 902 was gone. In her place sat a husk. Her roots were showing, a jagged line of grey encroaching on the expensive blonde dye job, a visual metaphor for her decaying life. She wore a modest grey cardigan, likely selected by a jury consultant to make her look harmless. It wasn't working. Her eyes were darting around the room, manic and terrified. Beside her, Julian Vance looked even worse. The once arrogant lawyer, who had threatened to sue anyone who breathed in his direction, was now hunched over, scribbling furiously on a legal pad. He refused to look at his wife. The rumors were that they hadn't spoken since the arraignment, each blaming the other for their catastrophic implosion. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Jenkins, was a shark in a cheap suit. She didn't need a Birkin to command respect. She had the evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jenkins began her opening statement, pacing slowly in front of the box. "This case is not about a bad day at the airport. It is not about a woman who was tired or stressed. It is about a pattern of behavior. It is about the belief that rules, laws, and basic human decency are for other people. And it is about how a single act of arrogance unraveled a decade of greed." She paused, turning to point at the evidence table. There, sitting in a sealed plastic bag, was the white Himalaya Birkin. It looked small, almost innocent under the fluorescent lights. "That bag," Jenkins continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "was supposed to be their lifeboat. Instead, it became their anchor." The first week of the trial was a dissection of the Vances' financial life. It was technical, but it was damning. Detective Kowalski and the FBI forensic accountants took the stand. They projected images onto the courtroom screens that made the jury gasp. "Exhibit C," the accountant explained, using a laser pointer. "This is a schematic of the bag's interior. As you can see, the false bottom was professionally installed. It reduced the bag's capacity by 20%, creating a cavity just large enough for these." He held up the stack of encrypted USB drives found in the lining. "What was on those drives?" Jenkins asked. "The complete off-book ledgers of the Children's Relief Fund," the accountant replied. "This was a charity set up by the Vances, ostensibly to build schools in developing nations. In reality, it was a slush fund." The screens changed. A spreadsheet appeared. "Over 8 years, $42 million were funneled into the charity," the accountant continued. "Less than $3 million went to schools. The rest went here." He pointed to a list of expenditures. "Vance residence, Hamptons renovation, $4.2 million. Vance private jet lease, $1.8 million year. Hermes purchase, Paris, $140,000. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The jury looked from the screen to Eleanor. She was staring at the table, her face burning a deep crimson. She wasn't ashamed of the theft. She was ashamed of being caught. "They were running," the accountant concluded. "The flight to London wasn't for a gala. We found emails on Julian Vance's phone confirming a meeting with a fixer in the UK who specializes in non-extradition residency. They knew the IRS was circling. They were taking the ledger, the only proof of where the money was hid, and fleeing the jurisdiction. Mrs. Vance wasn't protecting a handbag because of fashion. She was protecting the evidence of a $40 million heist. If the financial evidence was the nail in the coffin, the video evidence was the hammer. When the prosecution played the video from the plane, the one recorded by the passenger in 2A, the courtroom went silent. On the large monitors, everyone watched Eleanor Vance in high definition. They saw the sneer. They heard the tone. "I don't know how you snuck up here. Go back to your section. Do you have any idea what this is?" And then, the slap. The sound of Eleanor's hand connecting with Jessica's face echoed through the silent courtroom. It was sharp, violent, and undeniable. Jessica was called to the stand. She was composed, dressed simply, but her hands trembled slightly as she took the oath. "Can you tell the jury how you felt in that moment?" Jenkins asked gently. Jessica took a deep breath. "I felt small," she said, her voice wavering. "I've been a flight attendant for 12 years. I've dealt with drunks, with scared flyers, with sick children. But I have never looked into someone's eyes and seen such total nothingness. She didn't see me as a person. She saw me as an obstacle to her comfort. When she hit me, it wasn't just the pain. It was the shock that she felt she had the right to do it." Eleanor's defense attorney, a high-priced litigator named Mr. Thorne, tried to cross-examine her. He tried to suggest that Marcus Sterling had escalated the situation, that the crew had been aggressive. "Miss Davis," Thorne said, pacing, "isn't it true that Mr. Sterling was blocking the aisle? That he was the one who refused to compromise?" "Mr. Sterling was standing in the space he paid for," Jessica replied firmly. "He was the only one who treated me like a human being." Then it was time for the star witness. The prosecution calls Marcus Sterling. The doors opened. Marcus walked in. The change in the room's energy was palpable. He didn't strut. He didn't wave to the press. He walked with the quiet, efficient stride of a man who had nothing to prove. He was wearing a dark navy suit, impeccably tailored, but, in a subtle nod to the incident, he carried his battered canvas messenger bag to the stand, placing it by his feet. He was sworn in. "Mr. Sterling," Jenkins asked, "why didn't you just move? Why didn't you just let her have the seat and avoid the conflict?" Marcus adjusted the microphone. He looked at the jury, then he looked directly at Eleanor Vance. "Because, Miss Jenkins," Marcus said, his voice a deep baritone that carried to the back of the room without effort. "Compromise is for negotiations between equals. It is not for bullies." He leaned back. "I grew up in a neighborhood where people like Mrs. Vance determined our future with a signature. They decided if we got a loan, if we got a job, if we got a home. I learned very early on that if you give a person like that an inch, they will take a mile, and then they will bill you for the road construction." "Objection!" Thorne shouted. "Relevance!" "Overruled," the judge snapped. "The witness is answering the question as to his state of mind." Marcus continued. "She wasn't just blocking a seat. She was establishing a hierarchy. She was stating, publicly, that her luggage had more rights than my person. If I had moved, I would have validated that belief. I would have agreed with her, and I couldn't do that." "So you called the tower," Jenkins said. "You cancelled the flight." "I did." "Did you know it would cost the airline money?" "I own the logistics company that supplies the airline," Marcus said. "I knew exactly what it would cost. I also knew that the safety of the crew is paramount. A passenger who physically assaults a crew member before the engines even start is a catastrophe waiting to happen at 30,000 feet. I made a command decision." It was the defense's turn. Mr. Thorne stood up, looking eager. He wanted to paint Marcus as the villain, a billionaire throwing his weight around. "Mr. Sterling," Thorne began, smiling smugly, "you talk about bullies. But isn't it true that you used your influence to ground a commercial airliner? Isn't that the ultimate act of a bully? You inconvenienced 300 people just to prove a point." The courtroom held its breath. It was a good question. Marcus didn't blink. "Mr. Thorne, I didn't inconvenience them. I protected them. And regarding the inconvenience..." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. "This is a receipt. The day after the incident, I personally authorized a voucher of $5,000 to every single passenger on Flight 902 for their trouble. It came out of my personal account, not the company's. Total cost, $1.5 million. He placed the paper on the ledge of the witness stand. "I paid for the inconvenience," Marcus said, his eyes locking with the attorney's. "Mrs. Vance paid for nothing but her own vanity. Do not confuse power with responsibility. I exercised responsibility. She exercised entitlement." Thorne stood there, mouth slightly open. He had no follow-up. He had walked into a trap. "No further questions?" Thorne mumbled, sitting down. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, stood up. Her hands were shaking as she held the verdict form. "In the matter of the United States, "There's Eleanor Vance," she read. "Count 1, interference with flight crew members, guilty. Count 2, assault in a special aircraft jurisdiction, guilty. Count 3, money laundering, guilty. Count 4, wire fraud, guilty." Eleanor let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She slumped forward, putting her head on the table. "In the matter of Julian Vance," the foreman continued, "Count 1, conspiracy to commit money laundering, guilty. Count 2, wire fraud, guilty. Count 3, obstruction of justice, guilty." Julian Vance didn't move. He stared straight ahead at the empty wall, his face devoid of color. The shark was dead in the water. The sentencing hearing, 2 weeks later, was the final blow. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Halloway, peered over her glasses at the couple. "You had everything," Judge Halloway said, her voice echoing in the chamber. "Education, opportunity, wealth beyond the dreams of most people on this planet. And you used it to steal from orphans. You used it to belittle those who served you. Your arrogance is not a defense. It is an aggravating factor." She banged the gavel. "Eleanor Vance, I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison. Julian Vance, as the architect of the financial scheme, you are sentenced to 12 years. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $42 million. Your assets are hereby forfeited to the state to satisfy this debt." As the bailiffs moved in to handcuff them, Eleanor looked back. She scanned the gallery, perhaps looking for a friend, a supporter, anyone. She saw Marcus Sterling sitting in the back row. Their eyes met for 1 second. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, a small, final acknowledgement of the transaction being closed. Eleanor looked away, tears streaming down her face as the heavy wooden doors closed behind her. Spring had returned to New York. The air was fresh, filled with the promise of new beginnings. Marcus sat in a small coffee shop in Brooklyn. It wasn't a fancy place, just a neighborhood spot with mismatched chairs and good espresso. Across from him sat Jessica. She looked different. The stress lines around her eyes were gone. She was wearing scrubs, bright blue with a stethoscope around her neck. "It still feels surreal," Jessica said, tracing the rim of her cup. "I walked into the hospital today, and I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel like I was just waiting for someone to yell at me." "You earned it, Jessica," Marcus said. "You stood your ground." "Because you had my back," she corrected him. "Marcus, the settlement. It changed my life. I paid off my mum's mortgage. I finished nursing school without debt. I'm working in pediatric oncology now. The kids, they're amazing. They don't care about bags or first class. They just want to live." She reached into her purse, a simple, functional tote bag, and pulled out a small envelope. "I know you paid for the lawyers and you paid the passengers," she said. "But I wanted to give you this. It's not much." Marcus opened the envelope. It was a card. On the front was a picture of a plane flying into a sunset. Inside, handwritten, it said, "Thank you for reminding me that I matter." Marcus, the man who moved economies, felt a lump in his throat. He tucked the card into his jacket pocket, right next to his heart. "This is worth more than the Birkin," he said softly. "Speaking of which," Jessica smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Did you hear who bought it at the auction?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "No. Who?" "A heavy metal guitarist," she laughed. "He's going to spray paint it black and use it to carry his guitar pedals. He said he wanted to turn a symbol of greed into something that makes noise." Marcus threw his head back and laughed, a genuine loud laugh that turned heads in the coffee shop. "Perfect," he said. The universe has a sense of humor. He finished his coffee and stood up. He had a meeting with a renewable energy firm in London, but this time he wasn't exhausted. He felt lighter. He walked Jessica to the subway station. As she descended the stairs, waving goodbye, Marcus paused on the street corner. He watched the city moving around him, the taxis, the pedestrians, the hustle of millions of lives intersecting. He thought about Eleanor Vance, currently sitting in a 6x8 cell in Danbury, wearing a jumpsuit that cost $12. She had believed that her value was determined by what she carried. She never understood that value is determined by how you carry yourself. Marcus adjusted the strap of his canvas messenger bag. It was old. It was frayed. It was priceless. He stepped off the curb and merged into the crowd, just another man in a hoodie, walking home. And that is how a $30,000 bag cost a power couple their freedom, their fortune, and their future. Eleanor Vance thought she was fighting for legroom, but she was really fighting a war against decency, and decency won. It's a brutal reminder that no matter how much money you have, you can't buy class, and you certainly can't bribe karma. Marcus Sterling didn't just win an argument. He exposed a life built on lies, all by simply staying calm and knowing his worth. The higher the pedestal you put yourself on, the harder the fall when reality kicks it out from under you. What would you have done if you were Marcus? Would you have kept your cool, or would you have snapped? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of high-flying justice, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and remember, be nice to people. You never know who you're talking to.